Hey and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at the tracking settings here on the left hand side. There's some important settings that you need to understand before we start tracking our footage. So if you expand tracking settings here, you will see some options such as pattern size, search size, the motion model, match, and then also pre-pass and normalize, and then some extra settings here at the bottom. So let's start at the top. So the pattern size is basically the amount of pixels that it's going to track throughout the footage. It's basically the size of the tracking area. Now the search size is the area around the pattern size. So if you have a fast moving camera, then you need to increase this search size so that Blender basically expands the amount of pixels it's looking for that pattern that it's trying to track. So I usually change my pattern size to around 40. I feel usually that's a good size to kind of start with. And the search size for relatively slow moving footage like we have here, I think 70 or 71 should be fine. So let's start with those settings for the pattern size and the search size. Now we get the motion model, and currently that's set to location, and if you click on this drop down you'll see all these different options: location, location rotation, location and scale, location, rotation and scale, affine, and also perspective. Now these are the different models that Blender will try and use to match that track going through the footage. Now location is simply up and down, left and right. Location rotation will include rotation as well, and location and scale will basically just be up, down, left, right, and also scale, so going closer and further away. And then you've got your location, rotation, and scale, which will be all of those things. And then affine and perspective, these two are very similar. That is when you have a lot of perspective change in your shot. So let's say the camera is kind of panning up or down while moving in and out as well. So when you get like a lot of perspective change, you will kind of use these models. Now you can change the model for each track that we're going to do. So we're going to do multiple tracks, and you can set this motion model for each of those tracks. So you don't have to choose one and then stick with that throughout the whole process. You can go back and forth and change it as you like. So for now, we're just going to leave this on location. We can change this once we actually start our tracking process. Underneath that you've got match, and here you've got two options: keyframe and also previous frame. Now keyframe means it's going to try and match that pattern to the first frame. So even if you're tracking all the way through your footage, it's going to look at that first frame, or that snapshot that it took on the first frame, and it's going to try and match all those patterns throughout the shot to that first frame. Usually I find that doesn't work too well because the pattern might change going further into the footage. So the second option that we have is previous frame, and I always use previous frame because basically it's matching that pattern to the previous frame. So frame 1, it will track a pattern, then frame 2 will look at frame 1 to match it, frame 3 will then look at frame 2 and try and match that pattern. So I hope that kind of makes sense, that previous frame usually works better. I find I've never had a lot of success using the keyframe option. So yeah, just change this match to previous frame. Then underneath that we've got pre-pass, and if you hover over pre-pass you'll see it says use a brute force translation only, initialization when tracking. Now I'm not exactly sure what that does, but I usually just leave it on and I get good results with that. Underneath that you've got normalize, and usually normalize is only when you have drastic lighting changes in your scene. So let's say there's maybe a light that comes on during the shot, then normalize will work. It will kind of not look at the brightness of the shot, but it's going to try and just kind of manage if there's any big lighting changes. Now for this shot we don't have any drastic lighting changes. You can see there the lighting stays very smooth throughout, so I'm going to leave this tick off. Alright, so if we go down a little further, we get to tracking settings extra. If you expand this, we've got the weight, correlation, and also the margin. We're not really going to use any of these. The margin, you can kind of tell Blender when to stop tracking if it gets close to the edge or the margin of the shot. But I'm going to leave these settings on default for now, so you can minimize that. Then under the track section, this is where you get all the tracking controls. So here we've got things like track markers backwards by 1 frame. This is tracking all the frames backwards. This is tracking all the frames forward, and that's tracking 1 frame forward. Now you've got these same controls over here as well. And then you also have clear, so clear backwards and clear forwards. We will get to that a little bit later. And then you also have refine backwards and forwards. And then some merge options as well. But yeah, just know that you've got your controls here. We've got your controls here at the bottom as well. And we're also going to make use of the keyboard shortcuts, obviously. So once you've set these settings like so, you can go ahead and save your Blender project, and I will see you in the next lesson.